Yeah, I like that. I'm going to order that while we're talking.
It's really just the notion that no one really gives a shit what you're doing or what you are. That's true. And once you can embrace that, life's a lot easier. You know what I mean?
There you go. It's fair.
Oh, hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL strategy show. I'm Dave Loughran, as always, joined by Eric Lindquist at Eric Lindquist over on the Twitters, and Matt Gajewski at Matt_Gajewski. Follow me at Loughy_D. Back again for another Wednesday edition, talking first look at ownership, first look at top stacks. And as you know, been doing this long enough now that this changes throughout the week. We're just giving you our initial impressions of where everything is right now, where we think it will settle, and where we think you can maybe find some good spots heading into week 5. Matt Gajewski, how we doing, brother?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for some games this week. It's a really interesting slate. There's not as many games with these enormous totals. So I think it's going to be a unique puzzle for us to try to uncover.
Yeah, I think so too. And the one thing that stood out to me out of the gate, Eric, is no Buffalo, no Kansas City, which means when you go and peruse the top stack tool over at Awesemo.com, for the first time in what feels like all season, we have relatively flat top stack, the highest top stack probabilities, which actually makes this more of an appealing slate to me, because you're not looking at some teams just straight breaking the tool and breaking the top stacks.
Well, it depends, because I also think that it was just so easy to play them and know that you got it in good by being over the field on Mahomes and Allen and having our tools kind of direct you towards that right from the get-go. I'm not saying playing 100% Josh Allen like Ryan did in the slant. That did not go ideally for my dude Rinpack, but there are definitely some spots that we're going to be having to hone in on a little bit more than normal, just because it's not so easy to plug and play the Tyreek Hill, Kelsey with Mahomes and Josh Allen with everybody.
And by the way, I'm not saying that your family doesn't give a shit about you. You know, if you just opened up the show with that, what I'm saying is in the sense of ego, just assuming, you know, you walk down the street like, oh, that person's looking at you. No, they don't care about you. Nobody really cares what you're doing. That's all I'm saying, Matt. I don't think that is an unorthodox way of looking at life. Actually, in my opinion, it's a little liberating, you know?
I usually think like that too.
In what sense?
Well, I used to work a lot in fitness, and people come in and they think everybody's like looking at them in the gym and stuff. And only people at the gym care about themselves. Like
exactly. You're exactly right. Yep. I started working out again and noticing now I was just starting to look a little bit better. And then I realized nobody cares. I don't even think my wife cares. I mean, which is a good thing when you think about it. I could just get morbidly obese and she'd still accept me. We won't get there, but you know, I have that out.
You anyway, want that Eric, beer at 9 a.m.? You have that beer at 9 a.m. That's what it is, right?
Well, I didn't say she'd be okay with me being a drunkard. I said she'd be okay with morbid obesity. There's a difference. Now, both, that might be a deal breaker, especially given my checkered history. But anyway, what do you say we jump into this, Eric, kicking it off with the running back position?
Let's get to it.
Let's do it. And, of course, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. Stick around. We'll talk about how you can get some decent money over there and win, because that's all that matters. If you get a cool deposit bonus and you're not winning, well, it doesn't mean anything. I'm talking about the running backs here at the top, though, Eric. And one thing that stands out, again, is it's pretty flat on this slate as of now. It's Wednesday. We just released our first run of ownership. Things will change throughout the week. We will get more news. We will get more information. Christian McCaffrey being a big one, no doubt about it. But at the top, once again, Derrick Henry coming off a 33 carry game. Let's just start with him. He's coming under 20% on DraftKings right now, but just under 19.3. And then Alvin Kamara against Washington at 18.3. McCaffrey's down there at 12%, but everything could shift if we get word that Matt Rule says he's coming back at full capacity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And for me, I'm looking at the running back position, a guy like Derrick Henry, the same way I did last week, where his salary stops you from getting to some of the other ceilings at other positions, whether that was Kelsey, which obviously didn't go well last week. Tyreek Hill really did go well last week. You absolutely needed him. And, you know, Derrick Henry, his workload is outrageous. I mean, I believe he's on pace for 40 more touches than anybody. I believe 418 is the number of touches for a record in a season. That was Priest Holmes way back when. And now you're looking at Derrick Henry projecting around 460 for the season. I mean, there's no way around it. Like Derrick Henry is somebody that you are going to be playing in pretty much every cash game format going up against this lowly Jacksonville side. You're probably running it back on the other side with James Robinson at 6K. But like Derrick Henry, I don't really know what to say. It's the most secure workload you're going to see. He's getting involvement even limitedly in the passing game, which is enough to raise his floor even further. I mean, I don't know what to say. He's 9K. If he goes for 35, you're probably in trouble in tournaments. And if he's underneath that number, you're going to want none of him. And going around the industry, I was able to do the show on Monday with Josh, where we got to do the lineup recap. It was incredible how many top 150 players were way under the field on Derrick Henry. So I want to at least throw that thought out there where maybe everything's different and we have to look at every slate in a vacuum, in its own little personal vacuum. But I thought it was very fascinating to see that Derrick Henry, fantastic cash play. Nobody would deny that. But almost everybody was way under in tournaments.
One of the reasons that could have been, Matt, and honestly, this is just speculation, is that how much of that do you think had to do with just wildly expensive players from Buffalo and from Kansas City and a lot of expensive players making it harder to get Derrick Henry into lineups? Or was this just the same notion as we've seen in years past where people just don't want to be overweight or even with the field on Henry, given the lack of pass catching prowess?
Yeah, I think it's certainly some of both. And he has a clear path to failure. A guy like Christian McCaffrey's path isn't quite as clear. And again, a lot on him is just going to depend on the injury. But when the Panthers go down in games, unless they get absolutely steamrolled, Christian McCaffrey is still really active in the pass game. And we saw Jeremy McNichols on the field for 40% of the snaps. The dude handled an absurd workload as a receiver. He had 12 targets last game. And that's something they've shown historically. So Derrick Henry, it appears that his early season receiving workload might not actually be there based on recent developments. And that was telling, I think, with a game where we had Julio Jones and AJ Brown out. So I think it's twofold. He was pretty on last week. He doesn't have a receiving role, which gives him a clear path to failure. And just to go off what Eric said about like Derrick Henry, if you put him in your lineup, there is opportunity cost with him with like Tyreek Hills and stuff like that. But even in this past week, if you put Derrick Henry in your lineup and you are also rostering another stud like an Adams, Kupp, Stephon Diggs, whoever it may be, you were making severe concessions at another position. A lot of people went to Nick Westbrook. Instead of doing that, if you ran a middling build and you played like DJ Moore and Deebo Samuel, you were able to make up that ceiling and then some. And we saw in the Millie Maker winning lineup, he did not even have Tyreek Hill. So there are ceilings at other positions in the mid-price range that make up for what Derrick Henry offers. So even a 35-point game, I do not think you need him in tournament lineups on most slates.
Yeah, it's a good point. If Christian McCaffrey, though, Matt, ends up not being limited, going up against the Philadelphia team that has been gashed in the run, I mean, hands down, when teams commit to running against them, they put up really solid numbers. He's $300 less expensive than Henry, but he's also going into a fantastic matchup and, of course, is the premier pass catching back in football. Would Christian McCaffrey be a guy where you're willing to make those concessions for?
Yeah, in tournament lineups where I end up with the build where I have an expensive running back, as long as our ownership sticks, I will definitely be rostering Christian McCaffrey. Not sure where I'm going to get with cash right now. I don't see a clear like punt play that I want to get to at this point. And it's similar to last week where I think a lot of them down there could fail. But again, unless there's like that clear value play, I think getting to some of these expensive players can be difficult, especially when you're making sacrifices at a really cheap position and playing players like Nick Westbrook and Curtis Samuel instead of getting like three elite receivers and like DJ Moore, Deebo Samuel, Odell Beckham, whoever it may be in that middle range. So these expensive running backs are difficult to navigate. I also do think there's some potential value at the position, which maybe will let us get to some of the expensive or middle price backs and expensive receivers.
Yeah, Eric, I mentioned this yesterday on the First Look show with Ben Rasa and Jordan Vanek. Mind you guys, we do this show every single day of the week. It all culminates in a 4-hour live stream leading up to lock on Sunday. But if you remember last year, I'm sure both of you guys do, week 9, Carolina, Kansas City, Mike Davis had been starting. Christian McCaffrey went down midway through week 2, comes back. There's all this speculation and rumor that he's going to be limited. There was no real clear-cut confirmation that he would or wouldn't, and his ownership was way down from where it would normally be, particularly in a high-scoring matchup like that. He went off. Just huge game both on the ground and the air. I actually am interested in seeing if Christian McCaffrey is considered limited coming back, because that scares a lot of people off. And I don't necessarily understand why you'd bring him back limited unless you're going to actually use him. So I'm paying real close attention to that. If we have a similar situation that we did to week 9 from last season, I could be very much overweight on Christian McCaffrey in tournaments where you have to take some of these chances. And what better chance to take than a guy who leads the league in fantasy points every single week he's healthy?
Yeah, I ended up trading him in like pretty much every season-long league that I had him going into that week, and I was really, really ticked off. And then they shut him down for the year, and I felt like a genius. That was great. But it was definitely the best tournament spot you're going to find there. But at 37 points, I mean, that's just kind of another thing that we're looking at in terms of the opportunity cost. Like, it's the same situation as far as the same coaching staff there, Matt Ruley there, but I don't know. 8,700 for McCaffrey. It would definitely just be a strict ownership play for me at that point. Of course, he gets more receiving volume than Derrick Henry. For $300 less on DraftKings, I think that makes just such an obvious tournament pivot so long as the ownership doesn't get there. If he ends up being a game time decision, I mean, that's really what I would be hoping for, is that you don't get news that he's active until an hour and a half before the slate starts, so that you have that Q tag next to him for the next 4 days. But obviously it's Christian McCaffrey. There's not a whole lot else to say. We know the passing game involvement. We understand the kind of ceiling that can be there. Is it going to be there completely? They didn't have Chuba Hubbard there last year. I mean, they had Mike Davis still behind him. And I can't even talk about Mike Davis this week. I mean, just so over this guy. But Christian McCaffrey, for sure, tournaments, fire him up.
What are you suggesting, that Chuba Hubbard would get more work than Mike Davis did?
I mean, they spent a pick on him at least. I mean, he's got a little bit of equity in terms of what they're looking at from him. They like something from him. He's serviceable. Maybe he can take some of the load off of Christian McCaffrey, as opposed to going up against Kansas City. It was basically like, we're going to win this game or our season's over. That's kind of the impression that I got last year from it.
Yeah, it's possible. But Davis also garnered 19 looks per game and started 12 of them, and they didn't really do anything in terms of reinforcement. So I don't know. We'll see. Matt, what do you make of some of these guys that are pulling this 16% ownership? I say that because you've got right now, and obviously Joe Mixon, we are waiting on his status. He's day to day, according to Zach Taylor. But Joe Mixon at home against the Green Bay Packers, Najee Harris against Denver. And then I'll throw Leonard Fournette in there too at 16%. All of those guys pulling very similar ownership coming into week 5, at least where it stands right now.
Yeah, they're in a tough price point, and you see them like across the board. Like Kamara, I think makes sense. The receiving role for him is a significant downgrade. I think with Kamara, you would just get to either Henry or probably Christian McCaffrey, assuming they're healthy. James Robinson, like ownership is reflecting right now, I think will be the preferred option in this range, just because he's really the only back that has a secure workload at his price point. With Joe Mixon, there's the injury concern. With a guy like DeAndre Swift, his workload has bounced around up and down throughout the year. And when you get lower, some of these players like Damian Williams, we're not sure his workload will be there. A lot of people are expecting him to fit in 1-for-1 for David Montgomery. But I think you just run into the problem where James Robinson's really the only back at that price point with any security, which pushes his ownership up. So for tournaments, I'm more than willing to take shots on some of the guys we just mentioned. But for cash games right now, I think it's looking like James Robinson's probably going to be in a lot of builds and probably be the safest play there, regardless of whether they win the game or not. And we've seen this in the past, very active in the pass game. He's not dynamic like Kamara, but he's going to catch a lot of dump offs, similar to like what Najee Harris does. Completely fine eating the ownership in low risk contests. And I think he just has to be the preferred play because of a lack of other viable options.
Do you think though, Matt, if Carlos Hyde returns and is active for this game, do you have worries that we see a scenario where James Robinson doesn't get the workload that he should?
So that's the really interesting thing. In their most recent game, obviously, like whatever happened, Carlos Hyde pops up game day, doesn't feel right, doesn't play. But even in the game prior, James Robinson slowly started to work away from him a little bit. I know Carlos Hyde still had 8 carries in that week 3 game, but Robinson up at 15, and the pass game usage clearly skews towards him too. That it is a concern for sure, but I think it's less so than like the injury concern with Mixon and some of the other backs that I will talk about later in the show.
mean, Urban Meyer's too busy finger banging chicks in a bar anyway, Eric, to pay attention to game planning for Sunday.
Dude, okay, so I've been doing a lot of digging into James Robinson this morning just because he's an important part of this slate. And I'm right there with you, Loughy. If Carlos Hyde's there, I have major concerns. Week 4, 95% of the snaps without him, 59% of the offensive snaps. As you said, the receiving game work is probably skewing a little bit more towards James Robinson. So that's a plus. But just for tournaments, you got to have that kind of on your radar to know Carlos Hyde in probably going to take some of that ceiling for sure away from what could exist for him at 6K. I'd rather scattershot around the range a little bit more. But watching Urban Meyer talk about the Travis Etienne pick a little bit this morning, just going back on it, he comped him to Percy Harvin, said that Travis Etienne was Percy Harvin. Matt, I don't know. I mean, I'm a Viking fan, so maybe I'm a little biased. Are those two even related whatsoever?
By the way, Matt, he also compared him. This was back in like April. Also compared him to Paris Campbell.
Yeah, Paris Campbell. I mean, there's that gadget player in the Urban Meyer offense going back to Ohio State. It's been played by like Paris Campbell. There's a number of other players that have functioned in that role as well. Travis Etienne wasn't used like that in college. So Urban Meyer obviously saw something in the skill set that made him think that he could do it. But Etienne, he was a great pass catcher, but he was strictly used out of the backfield. Like this was not a dynamic pass catcher at Clemson. He was getting dump offs. He was not running in and out of the slot. And he actually was a really bad receiver early in his career at Clemson. It's something you need to work on. So I don't know what Urban's talking about.
Percy Harvin, he never had more than 3 carries per game on any season in his NFL career. 52 he had in one season with the Vikings. It was just so weird looking at as a comp. And, you know, obviously Urban Meyer, there's something off with this guy. I mean, the more I'm looking into it, he's just off.
Well, you know what? The Percy Harvin comp is perfect because he didn't want to use Travis Etienne as a running back anyway. So
there you go.
Maybe
just gadget guy.
Maybe that's exactly what we were looking at. In the 12% range, you got guys like Dalvin Cook against Detroit. Man, this is one spot to me, Eric, where if his ownership continues to slide because people are worried about Alexander Mattison last week and Dalvin Cook not being at 100%. We saw what David Montgomery did last week. I mean, I could see this being one of those spots where Kirk Cousins is hyper efficient, right? But doesn't have a lot of volume. Maybe Adam Thielen and Jefferson score, but then Dalvin Cook racks up 160 on the yard on the ground with 2 touchdowns as well. I mean, I could really see this as one of those wildly efficient games from the quarterback, but also Dalvin Cook, assuming he's back to full strength, just running roughshod over this Detroit defense.
They shouldn't have been playing him last week. He was obviously not okay. He played less than 50% of the snaps here. And, you know, he's obviously a competitor. You wanted to get it going. You didn't want this team to go to 1-3. Well, they're 1-3.
And Madison's good too. It's not like you have no backup.
Exactly. Madison's very good. And Madison, I mean, he's just like a smaller version, doesn't necessarily have the power, obviously, but very shifty, capable of making big chunk plays, has pretty good vision. I like a lot of the stuff from Madison. Dalvin Cook, though, I mean, he's obviously the superior back, and another week of rehab here. Obviously, they just didn't want to utilize him in full in this spot. He was definitely out there as a limited basis. I think in the matchup, I mean, you just have to look at it matchup wise. If he's a full go, there's massive ceiling, and you just have to be willing to weigh out that risk. It's just kind of a risk tolerance thing as far as how much Dalvin Cook, because above it, you've got Kamara, McCaffrey, Henry. There's no question what those ceilings look like. It's not that much more to get up from Cook, but in the event that ownership were to slide a little bit and start dropping, you need to absolutely be kind of going his direction. So kind of putting him more in a loop with McCaffrey, where there's a lot of risk, a lot of injury question marks, but who cares in tournaments?
It's kind of and I'm with you, by the way. It's kind of an exciting slate, Matt, because you have a lot of uncertainty coming into this week based on what we saw from last week and previous weeks, whether it be Christian McCaffrey coming back from injury or maybe not. Dalvin Cook, as Eric said, playing less than 50% of snaps. And then DeAndre Swift, who was out-touched on the ground by Jamal Williams, but played 73% of snaps to Williams 30, ran 32 routes to Williams 5, who wasn't targeted, and still on the season has a 50-50 split on backfield carries with Jamal Williams. Love to hear your opinion on someone like Swift against this Minnesota team and what could, dare I say it, be a shootout.
Yeah, I like Swift as a pivot off of James Robinson in tournaments. I think there's concerns with Swift, just like there are with Robinson and Carlos Hyde. They they said before the week that they were going to get Swift more involved, and they kind of did in a way. You mentioned all of the ancillary statistics that didn't actually culminate in box score production, but Swift was out there a lot. And when he's out there, he's used primarily on passing downs, which is going to be his role no matter what. Jamal Williams isn't going to be a huge factor there. And with Detroit projecting to trail in a lot of these games, I think it does make him viable, especially in tournaments. We've seen backs, even like we can use James Robinson last year as an example. These big underdogs, as long as they're heavily involved in the pass game, can still get you there, even if they're on bad offenses and not scoring a lot of points. And I think in this situation, as bad as Minnesota's defense has been, there should be at least a reasonable expectation that Detroit puts up some points here. I mean, their implied team total is north of 20, which is positive and not something we can say about a lot of teams on this slate.
What about you, Eric? Just kind of in this middle tier of ownership, below the guys that are pulling the most, but then higher than most of these guys that are virtually unowned. You have probably a group of 5 or 6 players in that 10 to 12% range right now.
Yeah, there's a number of guys as you're just kind of going through the list here. Saquon Barkley, I was all over him last week. That was
good
fun.
call. I heard that on the Live Before Lock show. Good times.
Thank you. I mean, a lot of it was fourth quarter and overtime. So I don't want to just completely pat myself on the back here. And it's just an opportunity thing for me too, where Saquon Barkley has this entire backfield. We know the kind of passing upside that's there. I don't know if I want to start chasing him now that he's up to 12%. It was a lot more fun when he was sub 3% to easily say there's a ton of upside here. He has an entire backfield and let's party. But I still think that he's worthy of having some shares of at 7,300 against Dallas. Dallas is just, I mean, their defense is much improved. That keeps kind of getting brought up. But in the event that their offense is just pushing the limit there, you have a lot of come from behind potential here. Saquon Barkley now starting to get targeted at the clip we expected him to the last 2, 7-6 targets there, resulting in a bunch of receiving game work. I really like that aspect of it. 7,300, a little bit lower than all of those top tier guys. And there's a ton of upside. Breaks one, you're probably going to need that more than likely, but that's what you kind of always need in tournaments. So I'm going to be keeping track of his ownership because I just have good juju going with him at the moment. What starts to get fascinating for me is a guy like Aaron Jones. So going up against Cincinnati, how good do we think the Cincinnati defense actually is? And also, how much do we see like not a squeaky wheel narrative, but like Devontae Adams was just relatively uninvolved compared to what everybody thought he was going to be last week. I mean, does Aaron Jones become kind of the contrarian guy to go to in that upper 7K range?
I like them both, honestly. And I'm with you. I have Aaron Jones in the run sheet today as contrarian option, Matt. And I didn't really find too many low-owned running backs that I loved. Yes, we saw AJ Dillon get worked in a decent amount, and he is a second-round pick from only a couple of years ago. But you have to feel like in competitive games, in this game, for all intents and purposes, should stay competitive. Right now, the Green Bay Packers are what's the line on this? Last I looked, it was like 3. Yeah, only 3 points. So field goal road favorites with a 51-point total. And the Bengals showed last week that, you know, Trevor Lawrence and company, who had really struggled to move the football, didn't have all that much trouble doing so against Cincinnati in Cincinnati. What are your thoughts on Aaron Jones against this Bengals squad?
Yeah, completely fine with him as a pivot. You guys mentioned the concerns. AJ Dillon is going to have a role. I agree with you, Loughy, that it's not going to be a direct 50-50 timeshare in competitive games. The score with Pittsburgh Green Bay looks fairly competitive in the last game, but I think it fails to encompass that Green Bay was, for the most part, in control of that game for most of it. Yep. So AJ Dillon, the workload, I think, was a little bit elevated. Aaron Jones involved in the pass game, and you've seen him used on, like, one thing I really like that Green Bay does, instead of just handing him the ball off on these like little bubble screens they'll use around the line of scrimmage, they'll actually have Rodgers like just shovel pass it.
I love that.
Which is great because then you get a receiving touchdown for Aaron Jones. He's stackable with Rodgers. And if he drops it for whatever reason, it's an incompletion, not a fumble. So I love that they do that. Jones is a fantastic pivot down there. Another player I'll just mention briefly, who I think is a strong pivot off the James Robinsons, the DeAndre Swifts of the world, and doesn't actually play a role that's too dissimilar from DeAndre Swift, is Chase Edmonds. And people just perceive the timeshare with James Conner, which it is, but for whatever reason, they want to discount Edmonds in his timeshare as opposed to like Swift in his Detroit timeshare. And you name the back, James Robinson versus Carlos Hyde. But for whatever reason, Chase Edmonds continues to pull low ownership in an explosive offense with San Francisco on the other side, a game that's projected 49 points, 50 points, depending on where you look at the total. Extremely involved in the pass game. Love him as a pivot too.
The only counter argument I'd make to that, and I'm with you in terms of Chase Edmonds and an explosive offense, you have to love that. But the only thing I would say is goal line touch. Matt, I've harped on this a lot. You're probably sick of me saying it, but 6 goal line touches to 1 for Chase Edmonds this year. Even this past Sunday, when Jamal Williams was getting more rushing down work than Swift, there were 2 goal line carries, and DeAndre Swift, not Jamal Williams, had both of them. So I do think there's that one element of the game where you say, even though Swift wasn't used as much on the ground, he has 4 goal line carries to Jamal Williams 1 on the season and had 2 last game to Jamal Williams 0.
Yeah, I'm talking about tournaments. That's certainly a tiebreaker for like cash and stuff for me. But for the sake of tournaments at lower ownership, I think the break you're getting by Chase Edmonds at 5% compared to like DeAndre Swift north of 10 and James Robinson at 19 right now, more than willing for that. I don't disagree with anything you said. 100% correct.
No, you're right though. I mean, when it comes down to getting just way less ownership, you are hoping Edmonds breaks one, of course, but it's not something he's incapable of doing. So
yeah, this is strictly tournaments. Like you need probably a big play from him anyway to win, and probably like a long touchdown. For cash games, I think James Robinson clearly the play over Edmonds.
And do we feel like Chase Edmonds is going to finish the season with 0 touchdowns?
No, but I think he's going to have far, far fewer goal line carries than Connor. And the reason Connor was brought in was for goal line. Like I could see this team going in a direction of James Conner's workload on the ground becomes less and less because he hasn't been efficient at all, but then they still use him at the goal line. And it's just going to be frustrating. That's all.
It's fair.
Like a Mike
I agree with that too. I think you're right about that.
Mike Tolbert. Oh man.
Dude, do you not remember the vultures?
Mike Tolbert. It's now Taysom Hill. I mean, we could just go on the vulture season. I can't even. It's CJ Ham season.
Who's the worst running back vulture in the past 10 years?
It's a quarterback. His name's Taysom Hill.
No. It has to be a running back.
Okay.
Tolbert, it's got to be him probably.
Tolbert, right?
Who's worse than Tolbert?
I don't know. All I know is it was horrible.
It was really bad.
Oh, who was the
Asiata?
I mean, Bell was still getting there. So
I feel like McGee was one in Baltimore too.
Matt Asiata.
Matt
Asiata is a great call. Man, we're just going to go down the Viking world.
Chad, who was the biggest goal line vulture in the last decade in fantasy football on the running back? Because I can't think of anyone better than Mike Tolbert. It's got to be it.
It's him.
Might end up being James Conner though. In all seriousness, dude, doesn't he have 2 straight multiple touchdown games?
I believe he does. I mean, Chase Edmonds, I know, has 0 touchdowns on the season because I was lamenting shares of him.
Connor has back-to-back games with 2 touchdowns, and he's averaging 3.2 yards per carry on the year. So, I mean, it's just they want to feed him down there, man. He's always had a high conversion rate at the goal line, though. So it is what it is. But hey,
I gotta throw one other low-owned guy out.
Please, I was going to ask you anyway.
Josh Jacobs. I think he's a good pivot off that 6K range too. They're favored over the Bears. He saw a very good workload. He didn't play a full complement of snaps, which I think is concerning, but it's just a pure pivot. Seeing 4% ownership, pretty shocking. Yeah,
and even in that game when they were down by a lot on, was it Monday night, right? Monday night?
Yeah.
He was still getting carries. They came out of the gate in the second half and ran him like 6 times on one drive down by multiple scores. So
look, man, John Gruden's got to prove that all his shitty picks were actually good.
Yeah, exactly. I got what, except Brian Edwards, who he's just decided is no longer Terrell Owens. You remember that comp, right?
Yeah, unbelievable.
And then Derek Carr said it was like, oh man, it's like I'm playing with Devontae Adams again.
Dude, John Gruden, so man. Bad. Right when Damon Arnett had to come into the game, he promptly just gets absolutely roasted by Mike Williams. And unfortunately, Herbert missed him, but it was like a surefire birthday touchdown for Mike Williams. Rip. For me and you both, Eric.
Rip City, son.
Did you, Matt, you're better than that. Birthday touchdown?
No, that Eric brought that up on our live stream.
I did.
I know it was the narrative, but
no, I didn't play him because of birthday touchdown. I just thought it was funny.
I tweaked my projections to mathematically factor in the birthday narrative.
Dude, you would be shocked how many people were like, are you really fading Mike Williams on his birthday? I'm not kidding.
But, you're like, yeah, he's hungover.
Yeah, right. So Oh, could you imagine playing an NFL football game with a birthday hangover?
I can't imagine playing an NFL game, period.
Right.
I can't imagine like making my lineups hungover.
Doing shows hungover where I'm sitting in a chair in the comfort of my own home is brutal. Really is. Your brain capacity is at like, Matt, if you shotgun 3-4 locos like you've done on multiple occasions and drink throughout the night, you wake up, your brain capacity is maybe 50%, right? Like thinking ability.
If that, dude.
Like,
You're stone dead walking into a DFS slate if you play after those nights.
I'm telling you, I would make better lineups, doing them drunk than hungover. I really believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Not blackout drunk, but like moderately intoxicated, way better than hungover lineups. Like a bad hangover, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Damien Harris, Eric, we haven't talked about him. I feel it. So you're off of Damien Harris this week? I am.
We're talking Damien Harris.
Why would we not?
Why are we talking Damien Harris? I don't want to play Damien Harris. I mean, one of my favorite things that we're looking at, the NFL Advanced Stats tool, which I got updated. Thank you so much to the guys behind the scene. It was so nice to have a little pull where I was like, hey, I really want to have this tool updated because I use it all the time. I have for years now, but basically allows you to look at the game script adjusted rush percentage.
Yeah, they're dead last in rush. I know, but
dead last.
I know, but I don't care. No. I really don't
lot.
care. Okay. What's that?
I care a lot.
I'll tell you why. Okay. There's no way they continue at this pace. The reason for this, number one, is because Bill Belichick's not a dummy. And he knew that he went into the last two games against New Orleans and Tampa Bay, the two preeminent run defenses in the league, allowing 2.7 and 3.1 yards per attempt, respectively. They are ranked top of the league in every run defensive category. There's no doubt about it. Damien Harris saw 4 and 6 attempts over the last two games. Go back to week one. Again, this is a small sample. It's only 4 games, but everyone hangs on to. He saw 23 carries against Miami and then 16 against the Jets. They're 9.5-point favorites against the Houston team that has a guy in Davis Mills who is legitimately incapable of moving the football. He had 30 yards passing midway through the fourth quarter in Buffalo. To me, I mean, I love that tool. I think it's awesome, and you should use it. You should utilize it. And yes, it's game script adjusted, sure, but that doesn't mean that you don't alter your approach for an opposing defense. And we saw McCarthy and company do that in week one. They didn't go to the run game at all against Tampa because they know we're not going to beat him this way. Let's just throw. Do you really think that Damien Harris is going to have 6 and 4 carries again? He still played over 60% of the snaps in that game. I'm going back to Harris this week, and if he's that low owned, I have interest. I think there's 2 touchdown upside here for sure. So yeah. I get where you're going with it, but I refuse to look at the last 2 weeks as any indication of what's going to happen. And when you're a 9.5-point favorite on the road against a team that has a miserable offense.
And that's kind of okay. So Damien Harris, he was like a top 5 PFF running back in 2020 as well. Like he's not any scrub. He's not terrible at his job. And obviously you go up against Tampa Bay and it's going to look really, really bad. And we always have to kind of factor that in. But as you said, this tool basically is adjusting for the game script. It's basically saying in a neutral environment, what should we be predicting in this spot? And, we've got the next game percentage already updated for them, and it's much, much higher than the 30% they're at. 42.7% will put them dead middle in the NFL as far as what we expect, the pace and what we expect from New England to be passing, to be running as well. For me, it just comes down to, it just seems like this is kind of going to be a Mac Jones testing season. Like this is going to be something where they want Mac Jones to go out and just play, because he might be really good. And I'm not just saying from Monday night, recency bias watching it, but like this is somebody that they obviously really, really like. You're trying to build confidence and build a culture, in the same way. He's not going to be Tom Brady, but he could be very, very good for them. I just see them wanting to utilize Mac Jones a lot more. And you didn't have last year, it was Cam Newton out there. Of course, you were going to run the ball infinity amount of times. So I just think for me, it just looks at like what I think New England's going to do going forward, not necessarily what I think they should do. Should they use Damien Harris more? Absolutely. So if you want to try to ride that narrative, it's not like there's any pronounced ownership on him. But for me, I just see Belichick. I see, Josh McDaniels. I see them utilizing Mac Jones a lot going forward.
Fair enough. And Matt, I want to get your take on this. Just one thing to Eric. All I'm saying is there's added context into that tool when you consider that a team might just decide out of the gate not to run regardless of game script because they know they can't run against that team, right?
Sure.
So if it's a neutral game script throughout, it doesn't mean that your team never wants to run. It might just mean, hey, we know we can't run against this team. Meanwhile, the Houston Texans, I think, have allowed more rushing touchdowns than any other team in the league. So I think Belichick's smart enough to mix it up. We'll see. Matt, Damien Harris, and anyone else at running back before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not our first season with Bill Belichick and like McDaniels as offensive coordinator. We've seen them be very run heavy at times. They're sensitive to game script. They're sensitive to their signal caller. They're sensitive to a lot of things. So I think you can expect more than 4 rushing attempts. How much more? No idea. I don't know if he's going to see 20 carries or what it is, but I do think it's worth gambling on in tournaments, especially when we've seen them do it in the past. Maybe not necessarily this season and the new signal caller changes things, but he hasn't really seeded a lot of work in the backfield, which I think is more important.
Right. Like he still led the league in carries led the team in carries with 4 last game.
Right. So if, and I mean, you can go back further than that too. We don't just have to use last week.
Right.
And they have not been very run heavy to start the year. That's fine. You mentioned a couple of reasons why. Neither here nor there. This is a team that could be run heavy at times too. And I don't know whether they're going to do it or not. I don't think any of us do. Bill Belichick might not even know at this point in the week, but if they do, it's worth taking a shot on.
Okay. Matt, anybody else here at running back?
I think we hit on most of the players I'm considering for the most part. There's like timeshare backs, I think, that are interesting in GPPs. Like Antonio Gibson has a workload. Like one we should probably talk about is Damian Williams for Chicago, because I think he's a guy that could get steamed up throughout the week. Right now at 8%, I'm more than willing to take a shot on him. But I really do think Damian Williams comes in with elevated ownership compared to that. A lot of people seem to think he's going to receive a 3-down workload against Las Vegas. I'm not 100% sure that's true. He has basically functioned as the change of pace back for David Montgomery this year. There's no Tariq Cohen. So his only real competition is like a day 3 rookie and Khalil Herbert. So I don't know. I think that's an interesting situation and potential pivot if his ownership stays down.
Man, I almost forgot. I forgot to ask for likes at the beginning of the show. I'm slipping these days. We got 450 people watching, 82 likes. 80, make that 83. We can do better than that. We can at least pop this straight up over 100, and it'd be greatly appreciated in advance for getting us over 100. And again, thanks to all you guys that have subscribed to the channel. If you're watching and aren't subscribed and you love this content and you want to see more of it, click that subscribe. Over 60K, well over 60K, thanks to you guys. Well on our way to 70K as well. And as you know, we will gladly refund your misery if you do not like what you see and you wake up in cold sweats regretting the decision to subscribe to Awesemo.com. Just go on your phone and click unsubscribe and forget we ever existed. I hope you don't, but it's very easy to get out of this negotiate. You know, it's not contractual, but subscribe. We'd love to have you hang out with us and be part of the Awesemo family because it's a good one, no doubt about it. Oh, and hey, Eric, did you know if you go to Prize Picks and use the promo code Awesemo, you get an instant deposit match up to $100?
You do?
I
would utilize that right now.
I absolutely would as well. And did you know there's no sharks or optimizers? There's no mass multi-entry?
Oh my God. No Alex Baker, no Steve Buzzard I have to play against?
None of that at all. All it is a daily prop-based contest where you pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players on the board to go over or under their projected scores. So all of the research that you've done for DraftKings or Yahoo or FanDuel, or even sports betting for that matter, it can all be applied neatly over at Prize Picks to create your own lineup on over-under props. 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you can net up to 10 extra entry fee on a 5-player lineup. They got it for basketball, baseball, NFL, esports, even WNBA. And with all these different sports, you can take advantage of the mixed sport entry feature, which people love. If you know baseball or basketball and football, you don't have to just do football, just basketball, just baseball. Mix them all together in what we would normally call a parlay. So download the app in the App Store or the Google Play Store or go to prizepicks.com. Check it out. And of course, use the promo code Awesemo to receive an instant deposit match of up to $100. Take advantage of that opportunity. Build that bankroll up. Win some money over at Prize Picks. All right, let's do this, fellas. Wide receivers. Matt, you first. Top of the position. You've got, well, a couple of interesting ones. Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, and DJ Moore up there, along with Sterling Shepard and CeeDee Lamb, of course, if Shepard plays. What are we thinking at the top right now? Pick whoever you want is the most interesting to you.
I think the most interesting player is Davante Adams because of price. DJ Moore is approaching him, but still Adams is the only player above 8K. And there's a $700 difference between DJ Moore and Davante Adams. So if you do make that concession, you are going to have to make some other concession in your lineup. And it's interesting that there's not like the direct 1-for-1 pivot there. But overall, I think Adams is a strong buy low. People like to talk about Cincinnati and the game script and Aaron Jones and running all over them. But Davante Adams is a very secure target share in this offense. It didn't work out last week. If people are going to go away from him, which it doesn't appear like they will, I'll certainly play him. Otherwise, I think like Sterling Shepard being this high is kind of surprising to me. I know they're very injured in the wide receiver core, but that just seems like a spot where you can get some easy leverage with some low owned plays in that price range. Again, he's 5.3, so he's kind of in this range where he doesn't have another strong pivot on the slate. I'm much more likely to play the Amari Coopers, the CD Lambs because of price, even Chris Godwin in that price range. And we talked about this at the beginning of this slate. When it comes down to playing those guys in a balanced construction, you can still take upside from them and not have to take a stars and scrubs approach if you were playing a guy like Adams or Derrick Henry. And you can play some of the expensive guys. It's hard to play more than one. Like last week, if you played Adams and Henry, your lineup was already making concessions with like Nick Westbrook, Akine, and then you had like Adams didn't get there. You were running pretty dead unless you played just like Deebo and DJ Moore. So taking some of the players that have similar target shares to Davante Adams in a lower price range is usually where I like to go, which leads me to like Amari Cooper, CD, the Chris Godwin range.
Where are you at on these guys up top, Eric?
I mean, TJ Moore, man. This is going to be fascinating for tournaments because what do you think? Let's just play the perspective game. An hour and a half before lock, you find out Christian McCaffrey's in. How much do you think DJ Moore's ownership actually changes?
Not much.
Not much at all.
Like, not a ton.
I'm going to absolutely have all the DJ Moore in the event Christian McCaffrey's out, and I'm going to have none of it if he's in. It's so weird that I'm so sensitive to that situation. But I mean, the ceiling, he's been so good. DJ Moore's kind of a freak, but didn't really have the ceiling performance until you took Christian McCaffrey off the field and they were in hurry up mode and they were in catch up mode. It was just a fantastic spot for him and he just went nuts. And so DJ Moore is going to be somebody that I'm just going to be extremely sensitive to. Your Eagles secondary, apologies, Loughy is shit. So there's that. Tyreek Hill,
the run game.
Not good.
It's all shit.
Yeah, everything's bad except for your quarterback. Who would have said that earlier this season?
Well, Devonta Smith is damn good.
Oh, he's so good. I love that guy. Never mind. But DJ Moore, 7,500. Now that he's got the price bump, I'm curious what his ownership changes to coming off of a ceiling game, but I'm going to completely be there in the event that there's no McCaffrey.
I like it. And it makes sense. Now, what if his ownership does come down, then you're still going to want it. You're still going to have some interest in DJ Moore if McCaffrey plays. No?
But I doubt that it will. That's the problem, is that how much do you, I don't see it changing. He's going to get written up. He's going to get talked about everywhere. People are seeing the ceiling game last week. They played him and loved him. They didn't play him and got burned by him. Like DJ Moore is going to be completely attached to however McCaffrey's status ends up.
Matt, I know you talked about him a little bit, but just to come back to this for a second, it's hard not to like Deebo Samuel right now. I mean, this guy has been absurdly just dominant, really dominant. And even when Trey Lance came in, had a couple 3-and-outs, didn't look great at first, and then boom, 76-yard touchdown, Deebo Samuel. I mean, he has a 79-yard touchdown in week 1, 76 in week 4, a 40-yard reception against Philly in week 3. I believe that was also a touchdown. His big play potential is massive. He's averaging over 10 targets per game. This guy is turning into a true elite wide receiver when so many of us thought it might be Brandon Ayuk this year.
Yeah, I like Deebo Samuel a lot. These receivers on Carolina and San Francisco are going to heavily come down to ownership for me in tournaments. I think they're both middling plays in cash right now. And again, we'll have to see how projections shake out through the week. But at the top, if you're just saving less than $1,000, it makes a lot of sense to get to Adams to me, or just pay down. But overall for tournaments, like there's easy pivots off both these guys. And it's not like you're making a ton of concessions. Deebo Samuel, 12 targets last week, George Kittle, 11. If you want to stack San Francisco with Trey Lance or whatever you want to do, you can get nearly the same opportunity in Kittle, and you can save a lot of money and fill the tight end position. With Carolina, you could take Robbie Anderson, who had one fewer target than DJ Moore. And again, we're dealing with a very small sample without Christian McCaffrey. But even if you go back to last year, different quarterback, but same offensive coordinator, Robbie Anderson's target share spiked a lot without Christian McCaffrey. And those two were nearly identical in opportunity. In a lot of games, Robbie Anderson held the edge. So there is a sample size with Robbie Anderson being heavily involved in this offense. Those are two easy pivots there. But overall, for cash games, it's going to come down to how projections look. But overall, I'm going to be fading those two in tournaments if it comes down to it.
Okay. And it was nice to see that George Kittle saw two of his only 3 deep targets on the season, because that had been something that was concerning me a little bit. But 11 targets, I'm here for that. Eric, talk to me about some of these guys that are lesser owned that you think deserve a lot more attention and aren't getting it right now.
All right, here we go. So the game that I'm probably the most interested in as far as just bringbacks and figuring out somewhere that the field's absolutely not going to go is Tampa Bay, Miami. I'm kind of borderline obsessed with this. You saw Will Fuller have an injury. Shocker. This is a finger injury, obviously, so I'm not going to harp on him too much that it's not the hammy, but you have a pretty condensed target share that we're going to be looking at with Jalen Waddle and with Devontae Parker. I think from the Miami side, both of them are extremely interesting, both underneath 10%. I mean, you have under 5% Devontae Parker, and we know the kind of massive ceiling that's there. Jacoby Brissett is very, very improved from what I expected him to be in this spot. The last 2 weeks, yeah, both in losses, but he's been keeping them pretty competitive, more so than I expected. And he's probably sitting a little bit too much in the pocket, 9 sacks through his 3 starts. But I just think that because of that same kind of thing we talked about with New England up against Tampa Bay, we know they're not going to be able to move the ball on the ground. It's going to be an aerial attack, and we are very aware of how good Tom Brady and this entire Tampa Bay side is. So I think it makes a very easy game stack. So I'm going to be looking at these Miami wide receivers quite a bit to run back with Tom Brady, Godwin.
What about you, Matt? Talk to me about some lesser owned guys. They don't have to be unowned, obviously, but anybody down here in that, maybe high or mid single digits that stands out to you?
I think that game actually carries a lot of ownership. Like Brady's the third most owned quarterback. The game is the 4th highest total. And at first glance, you might say, 48-point total, but there's only 2 at or above 50. And I mean, the San Francisco game's even trending down from there. So, I mean, I think that game is probably going to be fairly owned. Tampa Bay has a 29-point implied team total. That's 3rd highest in the slate. I do think there's ways to stack the game that are contrarian, and it basically comes down to pick between Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, see who's the lowest owned and use them in your lineup if you want to stack the game. But I do think this is a game that gets steamed throughout the week just because you don't have a lot of other high options. And I mean, even on the game with the highest total, how many people are going to try to stack the New York side of that game? I'm sure a fair amount will, but it's less attractive than situations like Tampa Bay. So that's kind of my take on that game.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'll tell you another one right now, all getting, single digit ownership is this Minnesota pass catchers. And again, I think what you could end up seeing, Matt, is just hyper efficiency from Kirk Cousins. But, Adam Thielen, the guy that everyone said can't sustain the touchdown production, picked up right where he left off after last year. He has 4 touchdowns in 4 games. And then Justin Jefferson's been good as well, and also garnering a pretty significant target share in this offense. I know Kirk Cousins has spread it out a little bit. You're seeing Osborne, you're seeing Tyler Conklin get some work, but what do you make of the passing attack for these wide receivers in Minnesota?
I think it's a place you can certainly get to. Like you mentioned, for the most part, it is concentrated. Conklin and Osborne have sort of opened that up a little bit compared to last year, but it's still mostly going to be Thielen and Jefferson. I think the main concern with that is you just see them roll Detroit on the ground. And is Detroit competitive in the game? Who are you running it back with on the Detroit side outside of like Hawkinson and Swift? But Minnesota does have an enormous implied team total. If you see ownership gravitating towards the run game, that might not happen because of Cook's injury. But if it does occur, I do think Jefferson and Thielen are solid pivots in this price range. But overall, I think my favorite contrarian game to target is going to be Los Angeles, Cleveland. This is a game that's taken some money towards the under, I think, predictably, with 2 good defenses on both sides. But at the same time, you also have 2 really efficient offenses and 2 offenses that have been solid as far as pace goes. Cleveland's 10th in plays per game. Los Angeles is 4th. So who's to say that it's instead of the defensive strength that wins out in this matchup, it's not the 2 high-powered offenses. Baker Mayfield played poorly in the last game, but that also doesn't mean that's going to extend forward either. You have Herbert on one side, Mayfield on the other. This is a game I think that has a lower total, which I will be targeting for contrarian options.
All right, Eric, last one here, because you earlier had mentioned that you could see this being a spot where Mac Jones is able to open things up and they just kind of let him rip, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jakobi Meyers.
Yep.
JJ Zacharyson tweeted this the other day and it was mind blowing. Jakobi Meyers' last touchdown was, Matt, where did he go to school? Like
Jakobi
Eastern
Meyers,
Illinois
NC State.
Yeah, he was quarterback.
NC State.
He got converted to receiver there.
Yeah, his last touchdown was 2018 in college. He has not scored a touchdown in the NFL, which is unbelievable when you consider the amount of work he's actually gotten. The guy has seen a decent amount of work. Now, this is the question. He is 8th in targets on the season. He's 8th in receptions, all right? Jakobi Meyers at his price point getting around 7% ownership. Is it worthwhile taking a shot at a guy as a 9.5 point favorite that's seen 26 targets over his last 2 games?
Yes, that would be the answer. Should I?
He's actually been good even without the touchdown. Sorry to interrupt you, but he's even been good without him.
Excellent. And we're going back to like the Cam Newton days. Even he was targeted like crazy there. He ended up being hurt. I believe it was like week 3 or week 4 last season. Didn't play for a while. Came back and immediately was targeted 24 times in his first 2 games back. I mean, the guy is a very solid route runner. I really like what they're doing with him in this offense. He needs to get in the box. That'd be great. I would prefer it not him as opposed to Harris for sure. After this show, I swear to God, I'm going to get just blown up the same way I did after I bashed Odell Beckham for being terrible at football. But, you know, I continue on. Jakobi Meyers, I just absolutely love it. 5,600 against this Houston team. I'm going to have a ton of him. Love everything that you're kind of pointing out with him there. You know, if he ever gets in the box the same way I related to Chase Edmonds as well, one of my favorite things to do is just kind of not be super touchdown reliant. And obviously being able to predict touchdowns is an important characteristic, especially at the running back position. But in terms of wide receivers, I mean, you can see some fluky stuff like this. He had Cam Newton and then a rookie quarterback the last 2 seasons. You're not going to get a lot of receiving touchdown opportunities with those 2 spots, but against this Houston team, this would be his most likely candidate to get in the zone out of probably any game he's played in his career to this point.
Matt, tight ends, unless you have anybody else at wide receiver you want to hit on. And I agree with you, by the way, Eric. I don't think that needs to be said. The opportunities will absolutely come. Eventually the guy has to score a touchdown.
Just Julio cursed.
Yeah, it feels worse than that. Not to say he's ever going to be as good as Julio Jones, but Matt, there's no real chalk at tight end. We see this quite often. George Kittle's pulling around 11%, Waller around 8%, Ingram around 8%. Just what stands out to you here? I don't think we need to spend an exorbitant amount of time at the position.
I think it's a situation where George Kittle should be more owned than he's coming in. 11% for a guy that just saw 11 targets. Again, very small sample. We basically only have a half football with Trey Lance. But they phased Brandon Ayuk out of the offense a little bit. He only played on 67% of the snaps. Mohamed Sanu, 51%. Trent Sherfield, 29%. So you have 2 clear options in the receiving game that are on the field for a majority of snaps and routes. It's Deebo and it's Kittle. And Kittle provides a unique skill set. He also fills a position that doesn't have Travis Kelce on the main slate this week. You're basically just competing with Darren Waller at the top. Otherwise, you're punting the position. So at 11.3% ownership, I'm surprised it's a little low.
What about you, Eric? Tight end position. Round us out. We'll talk top stacks before we go because this is always one of my favorite parts of the show.
I mean, we got to expect TJ Hawkinson to get back to life, right? He shouldn't be under 4% when you don't have Kittle or when you don't have Kelce. When Kittle's getting the most ownership, it's probably going to only go up as we get closer to lock just because of that game environment, because people probably feel a little bit more comfortable clicking on him. But I'm obsessed. If we're going to get sub 4% TJ Hawkinson, you only have to go back to week 1 and week 2 to just know that the opportunities are going to be there. Hasn't gotten in the box. It's not an efficient offense. Jared Goff obviously is not good either, but this is talking about a player that I think long-term is going to see the most targets out of anybody on this team because of how thin it is there at the wide receiver spot. It's going to get to Quintez Cephas, to Khalif Raymond, to all those other guys. TJ Hawkinson, probably my favorite play of the tight end position with our early run of ownership.
They make up TJ Hawkinson and Swift make up almost 45% of the team's red zone targets. So I'm okay with that. Now, give me that all. Hawkinson's seen a quarter of the red zone targets this season. Like that's all. He's going to have some bad games. He's not going to produce every single week, but to think that Quintez Cephas and Khalif Raymond are the new show in town, and your biggest playmakers like Hockenson and Swift are just going to kind of fade away, never going to happen. That was the one guy I had listed as well. I will throw Zach Ertz in there too. Around 1% ownership, 15 targets over the last 2 weeks, second only to Devontae Smith, who has one. By the way, Devontae Smith's getting like 2% ownership this week too. So I think those two guys are appealing, and Zach Ertz leading the team in red zone targets as well since week 3 when he became involved. He's firmly entrenched in this offense now. Only ran 2 fewer routes than Dallas Goedert last week. There's, to me, some interesting stuff going on with him, and Hurts loves to target these running back or tight ends. All right, fellas, let's do this. Top stacks, all of this at awesemo.com if you haven't checked it out yet. And of course, if you're not a premium sub, MLB Showdown ownership rankings and PGA rankings are free today to get ready for everything that's coming up tonight and tomorrow. But hey, top stack tool for not just football, but you have it for baseball, for every sport where it's applicable, really, even esports. I think, we got a top stack tool for esports, ownership projections for everything, player projections, the boom bust tool, the lineup builder. Like Eric said, we're just continue to add more advanced stats like the game script adjusted rush percentage and a lot of stats that are really going to help you create an edge. We have the Fantasy Cruncher add-on too. If you want to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum, use the promo code NFL Showdown or NFL Strategy Show. Is it NFL Strategy or NFL Strategy Show? NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps, 25% off Awesemo Plus Platinum Weekly. We now do Fantasy Cruncher 1 week add-ons if you want to do that. Or if you're saying, listen, I'm just trying to make a legitimate investment here, and I want to go for the full year for NFL or for every sport, or let me just get the whole month, NFL or any sport, no matter what it is. You want to wait for basketball, that's cool too. Go to awesemo.com/join. Check out everything we've got to offer, whether you're a novice, whether you're serious about this, a pro, or whether you're just someone that likes to do this as a hobby but wants to win, because we all want to win. Check out all the tools, all of which have been created and used, and a lot of money won with them by the #1 ranked DFS player out there, Awesemo himself. You'll see him back on shows this week after tying the knot and taking some time off. So awesemo.com/join. Check it out. All right, Matt, top stacks, baby. Let's do this. Highest projected or top stack probability: Tampa, Arizona, Green Bay, Dallas, Chargers, Minnesota. None of them are more than 3% separated because there's no Kansas City. There's no Buffalo this week.
Yeah, my favorite one, and it's not exactly the highest stack, but I do like Los Angeles a lot in the Cleveland game. I think pace sets up well, 2 efficient offenses. Defenses are strong on both sides, which is what I think keeps the ownership overall depressed here, but easily stackable players you can take at all price points in these games. That's one that I'm looking at to get a lot of leverage on.
What about you, Eric?
So, I mean, you had talked about Tom Brady, that he was going, that it was going to be chalky, but he's still the highest leverage spot we have on this slate, only 6.8%, I believe 7.1% in our last run over on Cruncher, but that's still a pretty low QB ownership that we're looking at there, and a top stack potential of 10.9% going up against Miami. I'm obsessed with this game. I'm playing a bunch of Brady, and I think it becomes pretty easy to know that I want to stack him up with Chris Godwin specifically. I don't factor in a whole lot of cornerback matchups. I think that's something that a long time ago, Matt Gajewski just got me off of watching him years ago. But Xavier Howard is a thing. And so I think he's going to be tracking Mike Evans around the field, and he's done a pretty effective job here. I just really think that it becomes very clear cut that I want it to be Chris Godwin in that stack, and then running it back with one of Parker or Waddle. I'm going to have that a lot this week.
All right. You look at the highest leverage stacks. You mentioned Tampa, Green Bay too. And Green Bay's always interesting because there's Jones and there's Adams, and Jones, as we've seen, can catch touchdown passes. Matt mentioned the shovel passes as well. All of that's interesting. I think it's going to be too tough, though, to play like a Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Jones, and I don't think it's necessary. But with MVS out, you do have Randall Cobb, who caught 2 touchdowns last week. It's funny because the stack for Green Bay isn't really that expensive in the sense that, yes, you have Rodgers, yes, you have Devontae Adams, but then you have all of these kind of tertiary options that are definitely capable of getting, just kind of sucked up in the Aaron Rodgers efficiency here. And if that happens, that could be a very solid stack. Another one I'll throw at you just as a high leverage stack is Arizona. Not necessarily a high leverage stack, but Matt, the thing with them that I have trouble with is you just never really know where the ball is going to go. And it feels like DeAndre Hopkins should just be cheaper than he is right now, given how much they've spread this football around through the first 4 weeks.
Yeah, and he's been injured too, which probably plays
Sure.
a little bit of a role there. But I think those are situations you want to attack in tournaments because people always are going to perceive this, all right, well, I can't predict who's going to get the ball. I don't want to play it in tournaments, even though it's a high-powered, explosive offense. So you can, if you're playing multiple lineups, you can spread it around a little bit. You can take a stand maybe, and even if it doesn't always get there, I think it's still plus positive expected value overall.
Favorite stack on the entire week, Eric? Is it Tampa for you?
I would say right now it's probably Tampa. I'm going to have probably a ton of Justin Herbert as well. I think just him and Keenan Allen. Mike Williams took a huge jump up 7,200. I think that'll keep basically all the ownership in the world off of him as well. So I'll kind of be going their direction. We're going to see a ton of passing game volume, and you compare him with Austin Eckler as well. So I think it's an interesting one for large fields.
And I meant to ask you this earlier, Matt. How do you approach the Minnesota-Detroit game from an overall stacking standpoint?
It's really hard. I think you take either Jefferson or Thielen, combine them with Osborne and Conklin. If you're taking double stacks, I think it's also viable to run just one of them. On the run back, it's really hard not to just play Swift and Hawkinson. I think you could maybe take some shots on Khalif Raymond. He's actually been really involved this year. If you want, not a preferred strategy, but if you're stacking that game, I think that's where I'm going for run backs.
Hey, thanks to all of you who have liked this video. We're almost at 150 likes. Thanks to all 550 of you that hung out with us or hanging out with us still till the end and that have subscribed and supported this channel because, well, you guys help us keep the lights on and do what we love here. Hopefully it's been as enjoyable, maybe even more enjoyable for you guys. We'll be back with you tomorrow, Matt Savoca and myself. The matchups, marathon matchup show. It's intense, but well worth it. 12 games this week. And Eric, I was thinking maybe it would be cool, right? Mm-hmm. With this Sunday morning London game where you just have fans, unwitting fans that'll never watch another NFL game after this. It's Atlanta, New York Jets. If you weren't aware, yeah. Mm-hmm. We should probably do a live before lock for that and start it at like
3:30 a.m. out here for me.
Not you, but I'm just thinking the idea of it. I bet there's some huge contests out there.
I bet there are. I mean, there definitely are going to be. They've had Showdown stuff for this all the time, and Showdown is taking over the world for sure. So I wouldn't mind it. Hey, again, 3:30 a.m. I'm here for it. Why not? Just because then I could say that I did it and nobody could question my commitment.
Maybe there isn't one. I don't know, Matt. I certainly thought there would be a Sunday Showdown slate, 9:30. Oh, here you go. $300,000 prize pool, $100K to first on DraftKings. Seems worthwhile, no?
See you guys in the morning. Kegs and eggs. Kegs and eggs.
Wait, 50? Yahoo has a 50K Showdown too for the 9:30, Tyler? Okay, cool. All right. Let me talk to some people, see what we can do. We'll see you guys back here soon. Thanks for hanging out as always. Peace.